Alright, y'all, welcome back to Common Arms channel. So in one of my recent videos, I think it was with the Amphibikåren or the Swedish Marines, a lot of y'all were recommending this. Guess it was an event, a training event, where a Swedish submarine was able to punk out the U.S. Navy and their aircraft carrier group. Now, I don't know the details specifically. I have heard of this before. I haven't really looked into it, but I think I found a pretty solid video. But yeah, if y'all aren't familiar with it, then I guess we can learn about it together. So as far as my experience with the U.S. Navy and submarines, I was on a nuclear submarine base. I was the security. I was sort of the quick reaction force CQB team that was on that nuclear submarine base. And so I have a general knowledge of submarines, but they're pretty much nuclear submarines. So our SSBNs or our SSGNs, which is basically nuclear missiles that have Tomahawks and then other like Trident missiles or what have you. So I have a general understanding of submarines, submariners, and how they do certain things. And then with the U.S. Navy, obviously I've been on ship before, so I sort of know how the U.S. Navy operates with certain things. So maybe that'll provide a little bit of context, but either way, we'll get right into the video and check it out.
Brand new, nuclear powered, capable of carrying twice as many aircraft as most competing foreign carriers, and protected by an entire task force. The $6.2 billion USS Ronald Reagan seemed invincible leading up to an international wargame exercise in 2005.
Okay, so I'm not going to try and pause the video too much, but I will provide a little bit of context with that. The aircraft carriers are extremely massive, and the aircraft carriers themselves are very resource intensive because they're so big and it requires a lot of crew and whatnot. However, when you're talking about the Navy, the ships operate in groups. So in the Marine Corps, you have the amphibious ready groups, which is basically an amphibious vehicle or amphibious ship that would deploy the Marines, and then you have these other ships to help support it and whatnot. So with an aircraft carrier, and when you're talking about the group associated with it, it's going to be very large because you're going to need and you're going to want a lot of ships to help support the aircraft carrier and protect it and whatnot. So that just provides a little bit of context of that.
Blow, then, and a complete shot, when against all odds, a super stealth submarine from Sweden snuck past the USS Ronald Reagan's defenses and scored enough mock torpedo hits to sink it during multiple attack runs. The Americans never saw it coming.
So I guess this was in 2005.
Never saw it leave.
Yeah, submarines are pretty crazy. They have a lot of technology in them. You'll be pretty surprised with all the stuff that you can actually fit in a submarine. Especially like nuclear powered ones. But I think this one was a diesel powered submarine, the Swedish submarine.
The USS Ronald Reagan is one of 10 Nimitz-class aircraft carriers in the possession of the U.S. Navy. The nuclear-powered vessel uses two A4W pressurized water reactors, rather than the gas turbines or diesel-electric systems commonly used for warship propulsion. These reactors, like the majority of nuclear power plants, use water as a primary coolant, which is pumped to the core under high pressure.
Takes a lot of water.
Energy. It then goes into a steam generator and is finally transferred to a secondary system where steam causes turbines to move and by extension gets an electric generator to spin. The nuclear-powered ship counts on 4 propeller shafts, which produce a maximum power of 260,000 shaft horsepower for a top speed of 30 knots or 56 kilometers per hour.
That's pretty fast when you're considering how massive it is. So real quick with nuclear power, a lot of people don't really understand it, but nuclear power in and of itself is an awesome thing. It provides a lot of energy. It's relatively safe. Like it's not like the only thing unsafe about nuclear power is if obviously when you're talking about like Fukushima in Japan, is when the reactors can't get maintained and whatnot. If you lose the cooling system or the cooling system fails and the reactors overheat, then that can be very, very bad. So that's sort of something to consider. Nuclear power is generally like an awesome thing as far as being safe and providing a lot of energy. But you need to make sure the cooling systems are solid or else it can get pretty ugly. So just things to keep in mind. I know that submarines have pretty efficient system, but it was kind of loud.
It can operate for an estimated 20 years without refueling and has an intended service life of around 50 years.
20 years
aircraft carriers capable
without
of
refueling.
Up to 90 aircraft, while the next largest non-American supercarrier, HMS Queen Elizabeth, can carry 70. The supercarrier is normally defended by escorting destroyers and even the aircraft it carries.
Yeah.
And it's also armed with the infrared homing surface-to-air missile system RIM-116.
Those things are insane. They're so cool to see. Especially those and the phalanx guns. Those things are awesome to watch. It's pretty scary.
The Gotland submarine is a stealthy, deadly silent, and incredibly cheap war machine. First introduced in 1996, this type of submarine was the first to use an air-dependent propulsion, or AIP system, in the form of a Stirling engine. Stirling engines use a closed cycle of compression and expansion of air so that they can provide thermal energy. Liquid oxygen supports the diesel combustion that drives the cycle, and in the case of the Gotland, it energizes a 75 kilowatt battery.
Yeah, so Stirling engines are pretty efficient.
The AIP system is incredibly silent in comparison to traditional diesel submarines, which in the past were viewed as inefficient because they can only stay underwater for a few days before resurfacing, resulting in increased vulnerability. The Stirling engine, though, allows the Gotland-class submarines, of which Sweden has a total of 3, to remain underwater for 2 weeks, traveling at 6 miles an hour.
That's pretty impressive for a diesel engine.
Snorkel or surfacing. Aside from its engine, the Gotland submarine is packed with features intended to make it undetectable. 27 electromagnets are distributed around the watercraft, so that magnetic anomaly detectors will miss its magnetic signature. Furthermore, the hull is coated in sonar-resistant material, and the interior is soundproofed by rubber buffers.
Yeah, so it's probably gonna be pretty stealthy if it's got all that.
Very difficult time picking up the presence of a Gotland.
It's crazy what you can do with just like a coating too, to make sure the sound waves and whatnot bounce off of it.
On the rudder and sail, which allow it to swim almost on the sea floor as it advances and even manages sharp turns. Some of the downsides of an AIP diesel submarine are that, unlike the nuclear-powered ones, it can't go on for months without surfacing, nor can it sustain a high speed for long, which means that it can be most effectively used for ambushing a fleet whose position's been identified already, or to defend bases in littoral waters.
Yeah, they'll tailor those sort of submarines to certain missions anyway.
Nuclear-powered submarines. While the $300 to $400 million price tag may seem attractive, the U.S. Navy has repeatedly dismissed the option of obtaining submarines similar to the Gotland class, as most of the Navy's operations take place far away.
I know the nuclear submarines the U.S. Navy has are like, they're a lot of money.
Some sort of preemptive response by vessels already stationed at sea. Gotland class submarines are generally
I think they're like a couple billion. I could be wrong on that, but I'll have to look it up. So those nuclear submarines can get very, very expensive. But, you know, the U.S. military likes to dish it out, so I guess it's not an issue.
Military exercises for which resources are deployed in a simulation of what an actual confrontation could look like. These exercises provide practice for soldiers, pilots, and crew members, as well as an exploration of strategies, weaknesses, combat readiness, and the...
It's cool to see, like, the inside. I've never been in, like, this little control system sort of thing.
Anyone's life at risk. Coordinating a war game with another country, or several more, allows for testing of different technologies, consideration of foreign tactics, and may serve to show the military might of the nations.
Yeah, it's awesome doing joint training. You can really learn a lot from, like, especially like...
The American government asked to lease the HSWMS Gotland for a year.
So when you're talking about joint training, like, I went out with the Moldovans one time. It was sort of like their recon element. And, I mean, with the U.S., you sort of get, like, an ego that the U.S. can be, like, awesome at everything, just be the best at everything. But the Moldovans, like, really perfected, like, their reconnaissance. So they were really awesome. They were good at tracking and whatnot. So these joint exercises are awesome. Like, they're usually for publicity, but at the same time, like, you really can learn a lot. So especially, like, on the lower levels, talking to the soldiers and actually, like, you know, interfacing with them, you get, like, a really good respect for them and what they actually do on a day-to-day basis. So it's more than just like, hey, these are our NATO allies working with us. Like, here, look at us train together. You can actually learn a lot, and it's really awesome to actually do these sort of things.
So it can conduct anti-submarine warfare exercises. Starting in June of 2005, the U.S. Navy and the Swedish Navy began collaborating in training exercises in the San Diego area. In a press release by the U.S. Navy from the 3rd Fleet Public Affairs, Swedish Liaison Officer Lieutenant Commander Peter Ospring shared, quote, "We are deployed here for at least 1 year, and will conduct up to 160 training days at sea, supporting strike groups, individual ships, and rescue submarines, and participating in the tests and development of new equipment."
That's awesome. I didn't know that even existed.
During international exercises, such as those of Sweden and the United States, the national forces will not always be in opposition to one another. Different vessels will trade places or act in different capacities.
That's really cool.
Beneficial tactics of cooperation and
When
to
you
test
like
how nations may fare
when you
against their own
take someone from a
technologies.
different military and put them in your units, it's
Speaking of
pretty
the
awesome. See how
HSWMS
they can
submarine,
actually work
Commander
efficiently.
Osprey also shared some of the ways the submarine was used during one of these war games. Quote, initially, it was acting as an opposing force, and in the middle of the exercise, she acted as a green, friendly force submarine, like a third country in a coalition, doing intelligence and reconnaissance missions for the strike group. Later, she returned to being an opposing force.
That sounds hard to keep
The
track of.
HSWMS Scotland has played a key role in enhancing the tactical and strategic prowess of the Navy, but it surprised the United States when during one of the war games, it managed to theoretically destroy the powerful USS Ronald Reagan.
Yeah, I mean that's not surprising.
The sinking of the USS Ronald Reagan fortunately featured no financial or human losses, as it was an unexpected accomplishment by the HSWMS Scotland during the game between the US Navy and the Swedish Navy.
Well, I would hope it
The
wouldn't
USS
kill
Reagan was escorted
anybody
by
if you're
carrier
talking about a
task force,
training event.
including several anti-submarine vessels.
Those things are so cool
The
to
Swedish
see.
submarine snuck past all of them, not once but on multiple attack runs, each time retreating undetected. Points were scored each time the Gotland was able to take close-up photographs of the carrier, simulating the distance from which it would have been able to shoot. The small diesel-powered submarine used its silent Stirling engine and quiet sonars to go undetected by the passive sonars of its adversaries, swimming right past the rest of the vessels not only during that exercise, but throughout the 2 years of collaborative war games. Nuclear-armed submarines, destroyers, and carriers were all bested repeatedly, with reports of American anti-submarine military officers.
You'd be surprised how much torpedoes can actually miss. Nowadays they're a lot more accurate than they were in like World War II, but you'd still be
The result of
surprised.
the war games served to inform and improve the technologies and techniques employed by both countries, with the United States Navy recognizing that its armaments were not particularly effective to combat diesel-electric submarines, which are held not only by Sweden but by antagonistic nations. The HSWMS Scotland had virtually managed to destroy the undefeated USS Ronald Reagan and established itself as an incredibly valuable military asset.
Yeah, I'm not sure how many anti-submarine vessels the U.S. Navy actually has, but I know there's a few. I've only seen a couple, but
One important
might be
consideration
worth
for the United
investing
States
in
following
some
the
more
virtual
technology
sinking
for
of the
those.
USS Ronald Reagan was that Sweden is not the only country implementing the Stirling engines in their submarines. China has 2 types of these, with a planned stock of 35 partially completed. In fact, Beijing has a Type 032 Qing submarine capable of firing off cruise missiles and ballistic missiles, which is believed to be the largest diesel submarine in operation. Russia, America's eternal adversary, has ordered 2 Lada-class diesel-electric attack submarines, scheduled for completion by 2022.
It's cool to see the submarines, like especially like the ones that the U.S. Navy actually has, because it just like it looks like it's completely streamlined. It's got no hatches or anything that can open. But when they actually put it in the dry dock, you can actually see how massive it is. So you can see how there's actually room for these like Trident nuclear missiles to go in. And then when they are like refitting it or what have you, they'll open up all the hatches where all the missiles go in, and it's crazy how many like openings and whatnot the submarine actually has. So I mean, you can't really see that. You don't really get a good appreciation for it when you're just looking at submarines doing their thing. But like actually seeing the missiles being loaded or being fired or what have you is really cool.
AIP systems are also present in submarines acquired by India and Pakistan, which are constantly in tension with one another. American allies such as Spain, South Korea, France, Japan, Israel, and Germany have also developed or purchased similar submarines. In fact, France is working on the SMX Ocean, a supersized AIP diesel submarine, which promises to be a functional alternative to nuclear-powered submarines. With evidence of its carrier's weak spots, the Navy decided to ask the Swedes to lease them a Gotland-class submarine to study how to counter its stealth mechanisms.
That's a good
Despite
idea,
the fact
though.
that America will most likely remain at peace with the majority of these nations.
Hopefully. Unless we mess something up.
Accepted to lend its HSWMS Scotland commanded and manned beyond the original year-long sets of war games for an additional 12 months, allowing the United States to figure out strategies to combat it, and whether it should acquire a similar submarine. Although after extensive research, the Navy concluded that it preferred to continue using and developing nuclear-powered submarines. The Pentagon saw little use for diesel-electric watercraft, since the majority of patrolling operations are done near Asian and European waters, meaning that traversing oceans from the United States would require constant refueling.
Yeah, that makes sense.
In fact, when the Gotland itself was returned to Sweden, it was actually shipped on a mobile dry dock instead of being transported under its own power. Still, the United States Navy learned valuable lessons from seeing its massive supercarrier.
Yeah, so there are limitations, but
be bested by a small Swedish diesel-electric submarine.
if it's capable of doing that, it's capable of being a threat. People are definitely gonna be worrying about it.
China, that may increase the range of these silent subs and threaten U.S. patrols in the seas around Asia.
Yeah, that's a lot of ships for an aircraft carrier. It's cool they got the little formation going on. Obviously, when you're talking about like actually deployment and whatnot, they're not going to be so neatly oriented like that. That's mainly just for the press and the media, just for it to look cool. But yeah, it was a pretty interesting video. It's cool to learn about like the technology, especially when you're talking about like other countries and what they actually invest the technology in. Like actually learning like why this is more efficient, sort of looking at the pros and cons of everything is pretty cool. Again, you don't really focus, especially the U.S. military, doesn't like to focus on like the vulnerabilities or whatnot. But I mean, you can learn a lot. It's normally like the higher ups or certain specific units, testing certain equipment. But for the normal infantryman, it's not really part of their day to day to look for vulnerabilities in their equipment. And submarines are no different, so it's definitely cool to check it out. Now, I tried looking at a few other videos about this event, and they sort of got into the weeds about the engine and whatnot and why it's so quiet, which is cool, but I kind of want to just get a good summary about everything. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, feel free to hit the like button. And again, just comment, let me know what you think. If you have any other recommendations for anything, definitely let me know. And definitely consider subscribing and hitting that bell so you can get notified whenever I upload any more videos. But that is it for this video, so I will see y'all in the next one.